I've been searching for biblical quotes. None of them. We don't know how many are dead. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be thousands. We don't know what's coming tomorrow. And I don't know what I'm doing. But I'll make you this promise. I'm going to be with you all night. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here.
After 1 week of fighting, rumors started to circulate of a possible worldwide military draft. It was either that or surrender, which seemed highly unlikely unless the other side pulled some really devastating attack. My dad called to check up on me and to remind me to stay away from the military. After I had reassured him that I had no intentions of enlisting, I remembered seeing recruitment officers around town. I kept my distance to avoid any of them approaching me. My roommate Bright, on the other hand, had no problem speaking with one of the recruitment officers. When we returned home, he explained his motive. If there was to be a draft, then anyone drafted would likely be made to serve as a grunt for the meat grinder. But if we were to enlist before the draft, with our degrees we could become officers. I was quick to point out the holes in his plan. Firstly, we didn't have our degrees yet, so we wouldn't exactly qualify for the Officers Academy. And secondly, as officers, we would be high-value targets for the enemy to take out first. Do you always have to overthink things? Bright said. It's what I do. Can't help it. I also mentioned to him that I was having a very special guest visiting for the weekend, and that he needed to be on his best behavior. Bright asked if my guest was cute. Very cute, I said, which led him to then ask if my guest had a sister. Better, a twin. Bright's face lit up. I almost let him enjoy his moment of ignorance, but Valerie was also a good friend of mine, and so I had to tell Bright the truth. Her boyfriend's a soldier. I hate you, Bright said. I smiled in glee. Maggie called me on the phone before I could give Bright a proper response and left to my room. Maggie and I talked via video chat and spent half the night planning out her visit. She hadn't decided on everything that she wanted to do, but made sure to give me a list of things she was okay with and things she was not, so that I can do some planning of my own. No fast foods for dinner, but they were okay if it was for a late night snack after all the restaurants closed, or if it was early in the morning before the restaurants opened. Bar restaurants and clubs were okay, but no frat parties. She also mentioned that she didn't really care for watching any movies during her visit. So hiking it was. I mentioned 2 possible hiking locations. She was fine with hiking Mount Coot. The second location was a no, however, because Kangaroo Point had kangaroo in the name, and she was once chased by a kangaroo as a kid. The Botanic Gardens were a must on her list, which I was fine with, along with the visit to Gold Coast. The next day, men in black suits were spotted around campus. I thought they were there to speak to the history department again. Instead, they ended up meeting with the astronomy and astrophysics professors and staff. None of us students were present during the meeting, and none of the professors spoke a word of what was discussed. This made me pay extra attention during lecture to see if my professor dropped us any type of subliminal message. As far as I can tell, there was none. I didn't think much of it until it came time to work at the restaurant. I knew it was nothing good when people around me started to look up. To be honest, it was the last thing I wanted to do. I was still in a good mood from having spent hours talking to Maggie the previous night, and I knew I had a good chance of undoing all of that. But much like when there's a car wreck on the side of the road, it was hard not to take a glance. It didn't look like much at first, just a dot moving in the sky. It could have easily been mistaken for a planet, or a cluster of space colonies to anyone not that well educated in astronomy.
Where? Where?
Well, that's the Big Dipper.
Uh-huh.
That's Venus.
Uh-huh.
That's the North Star. Well, what is that?
Unfortunately for me, I knew too much. Samantha studied my stiff body language and concluded that I knew something that the customers looking up didn't. What is it? She asked. Not sure, I lied. I was pretty sure I knew what it was. I blinked hard to hopefully correct my vision. but it was correct all along. Samantha pulled me to the side and out of sight from everyone. "What?" she asked again. "I could be wrong," I told her. "You wouldn't look like you do if you believed that." "A moving colony," I said in a whisper. It was clear now what the men in black suits talked about with the professors. They didn't want us to spot the moving colony and inform the public. "Isn't that normal when they make new space colonies?" Samantha asked. I explained that they only move within their clusters. A colony never drifts far away from its group. Samantha asked if we should tell anyone. I told her no, that we didn't know anything other than it was moving in space. We didn't even know what its destination was. I think I was telling it to myself more than I was saying it to her. I did my best to stop myself from overthinking things any further after that, and worked on autopilot for the remainder of my shift. By the middle of the week, a propaganda campaign started to go around the news, informing us not to talk about the war as much, to avoid the enemy gaining any information on us. I didn't really know how the other side could gain any information on us other than the possible satisfaction of frightening some of us. Some news outlets also said that talking about the war was not good for the public's mental well-being. The same politician who said that there will be no war spoke on the news again, telling people to remain calm, and that the moving colony was too far away to be a threat. I was amazed he was still willing to talk after how wrong he was the first time. Not to mention after all the numerous calls for his resignation. Towards the end of the week, some of my classmates and I met in private to piece together what information we had in regards to what the men in black suits talked about with the professors. We all figured we knew where the colony was going. It was just a matter of needing to be sure. We got our telescopes and did the math for most of the day. We triple-checked our answers and cross-referenced each other's notes to ensure that we were all correct and getting the same answer. The colony was coming here. Based off of our numbers, it seemed that its destination was somewhere in South America. Some of us froze in silence, almost as if we had forgotten how to speak. A few ran to the restroom to vomit. I don't know what the rest did. I didn't pay attention to anyone after that. I kept trying to figure out a way to prove us wrong. In the end, nothing came to mind. The numbers didn't lie. "How big was the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs?" Bright asked. I knew he knew the answer to that. We all did. We were all thinking along the same lines. "Smaller than the colony," I told him. "But a colony is hollow, which changes things," someone else said. Some in the group wanted to tell as many as they could. Others only wanted to tell anyone who knew someone currently living in South America. The rest wanted to remain silent, not because they wanted to, but because we didn't know what the government and Space Forces had planned. We speculated on how the Space Forces might stop the colony from falling. A nuclear warhead or two from the inside might be enough to at least break it up into tiny pieces, and hope that most of the leftover parts burned up in the atmosphere. The main concern after that would then be on how radioactive those leftover pieces would be. The group of students who wanted to warn the people of South America raised their voices even more. My tendency to overthink things then raised another concern that I had to voice. With us not knowing what the Space Forces had planned, there was still the likely possibility that the colony's course could be changed even by a few degrees. That would be enough to make it land anywhere else, which meant that nowhere on Earth was actually safe. In the end, none of us came to a clear agreement, and we all went home more silent than we had ever been in our entire lives. Maggie called as soon as Bright and I arrived back at the apartment. She was quick to ask if anything was wrong after she noticed how little I spoke. I hoped she would just continue to talk so to help keep my mind off of things. I reassured her that it was nothing, that I was just tired from work and school. She moved the conversation along to say that her trip may be delayed because she had to pick up Dylan from the police station. He had been arrested for disturbing the peace. I asked for more details and learned that Dylan was telling people to leave Sydney while they still had a chance. With news of the moving space colony, it made sense that authorities didn't want anyone saying anything like what Dylan was saying. I wasn't exactly sure if it was his fortune cookie way of thinking or just him being extra paranoid, since South America was where the colony was actually heading towards, and not Sydney. That could be why the police decided to let him go. There was no way anything Dylan said could be related to the colony. I asked Maggie to keep me updated after she was to pick him up from the police station. The colony entered Earth's orbit by the morning, and at least half of the entire world's blood turned to ice. Anyone with eyes can look up and see it. No one knew what to do, and there was no way any government can keep it secret any longer. News anchors and correspondents asked police and political officials if we should expect evacuation orders. They all stated that there was no need for anyone to evacuate. If the colony did fall to Earth, what was left of it would land in the Pacific Ocean. A news anchor asked if coastal regions should evacuate in the event of a tsunami. The politician said that the pieces would be too small to cause any serious damage, but that coastal regions should nevertheless be on alert, and beachgoers should avoid sunbathing for the next 48 hours. My parents called me early to check up on me. They asked if I had a landline phone at the apartment in the case of an emergency. With all the activity in space, it was sure to knock out a few communication satellites. I told them that we had one collecting dust somewhere, and that I would find it as soon as I got home. Work was the usual mind-numbing work that it was. That was when I received a call from Maggie. She informed me that she was coming a day earlier. Dylan had offered to buy her an earlier plane ticket as an apology for making her go through the trouble of picking him up from the police station. Maggie repeatedly refused to accept Dylan's offer, but he insisted and asked her to please accept it as a thank you gift. "You know what that fortune cookie boy is like," Maggie said, and then asked if her arriving a day earlier interfered with any of my plans or schedule. I told her no, and that I was pretty much free for the entire weekend after my shift ended. She then passed the phone to Dylan. He told me to take good care of Maggie and myself, and that he wished we had gotten the chance to hang out more than we did back when we were in high school. He was also sorry that he didn't do as good of a job at keeping in touch as he could have. I told him that his words sounded like the ones coming from a dying man, or at least a man on the run. Dylan explained that he may have said too much, and now needed to go on his own solo adventure elsewhere. He finished by saying he figured half the things he's ever said hardly ever made sense, but that he knew I was smart enough to eventually catch on to his meaning. He told me goodbye and passed the phone back to Maggie. Maggie gave me her plane's arrival time and told me she'll see me soon. Maggie called me about an hour earlier than expected. Her plane had made an unscheduled landing at Gold Coast and was grounded for safety concerns over falling space debris. A few satellites that dealt with navigational controls had also gone offline. She sounded a little concerned over the phone, which triggered me to jump out of bed and get ready to leave. I was already walking towards Dylan's room to ask for a ride when Maggie asked if I could somehow pick her up. "I'll be there in an hour," I told her. I then told Bright that I would buy him breakfast for a week if he gave me a ride and got me to Maggie in an hour. He told me that I also had to pay for any speeding ticket if he got pulled over along the way. I agreed and told Maggie that we were on our way. We arrived in Gold Coast just as the sun came up on the 16th of January. That's when we saw a large number of military planes fly overhead. On the radio, basically every station gave news updates about falling debris. An evacuation order had been given out to the people living in South America, in and around the Amazon rainforest. There were also reports of people being evacuated to underground bunkers and even a few military bases. Aside from that, it wasn't all that bad. The space colony had been broken up into 3 pieces before it entered the atmosphere. But how big are the three pieces? Bright asked out loud. The fact that we couldn't see it meant that it had been broken up over the atmosphere on the other side of the world. I called Maggie to tell her we were nearing the airport. She picked up again and said, "Hello?" right before the call dropped. I called her again, but this time the call wouldn't even go through. I sent her a text message, hoping we'll have better luck at communicating that way. Again, no luck. My message wouldn't go through. I figured it must have been because of all the activity in space. The loss of communication was nevertheless enough to increase my heart rate. The final stretch of the road felt to be the longest. The traffic, although not as heavy, didn't feel like it could move fast enough. "We'll get there," Bright said. I searched for Maggie among the crowd of people leaving the airport. The grounded planes had created a buildup of traffic in the drop-off and pickup locations. I called her name in hopes she'll at least be able to hear or spot me. This was made difficult, however, with cars honking and speakers giving off instructions and updates. Maggie finally called out to me. I turned in the direction of her voice. Despite looking everywhere, I couldn't spot her until she ran to stand right in front of me at the side of the car. I exited the car to greet her, and we embraced with a light smile. Although, not for long. The television on the wall gave news updates on the falling space colony. The back end had broken up over North America. Images started to come in. Even though it had broken apart in the atmosphere, that wasn't enough to prevent it from causing large-scale destruction across the continent. A second news alert soon followed. This time, it was an update on the middle section of the colony. It had landed in the Pacific Ocean, mostly intact. A tsunami warning was now in effect. Police officers blew the whistles and informed everyone to make an orderly evacuation away from the coast. I helped Maggie put her luggage in the trunk of the car and opened the car door for her. As Bright drove off, Maggie told us how everyone around her had lost signal on their phones earlier. Just before I had called her, she had been on the phone with her sister Valerie when the call had been dropped. On the radio, there was a report of large waves starting to hit coastal regions in East Asia. That was the last of the updates. All the radio stations went dark soon after, and none of our phones had service. Something was interfering with the signals. That's when the third and final piece of the colony was spotted. Tires screeched and vehicles collided as many of the cars ahead of us stopped in the middle of the road. Bright pulled over to the side to avoid crashing himself. All three of us got out of the car and looked up. Many people screamed or cried out loud. Some ran away on foot. Others stood frozen. Police nearby spoke through their speakers, informing everyone not to panic, that the colony was not going to hit us. It was going hundreds of miles south of us. Maggie and I held hands. Not a single word was said, because neither of us knew what to say. We wanted to console each other, but we had no way of knowing how. We only knew that our home was hundreds of miles south, and that we were never going back.